Good evening to one and all here. Warm greetings from Jaya School of Architecture. We welcome you for the 7th series of the DECODE session. The series is on a very interesting topic, India and Southeast Asia and Architectural Connection by architect SRIRANJANI. I would like to introduce architect Esther Sherin, a young dynamic professor, academician, researcher, and practicing architect who had been practicing architecture for past 13 years. She has been excelling in designing residential and commercial projects and currently associated with Jaya School of Architecture. We welcome you to deliver the welcome address, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Kavita ma'am. A very good evening to one and all present here. It is such a privilege and honor to be here among all of you. And it is indeed my special privilege to welcome Mrs. SRIRANJANI, the first speaker, lady speaker of the DECODE series. Mrs. SRIRANJANI is a postgraduate in architecture and has been an academician since 2016, mentoring students in architectural design. She is presently a professor of architecture with a private college in Chennai. She is a member of the Indian Green Building Council and a lead accredited professional. Architect SRIRANJANI has passion for academic research, especially in the spectrum of sustainability and architectural history. She has been involved in creating awareness on sustainability and green building among students by conducting various programs for students. She is also a regular guest speaker for a popular radio channel and in the city and a YouTube channel where she takes the concepts of sustainability and green buildings to common man. Her thirst for research on architectural history led her to explore the impact of Indian architecture on the architecture of Southeast Asia. She has presented a paper titled Analyzing the Impact of Indian Architecture on the Architecture of Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia at the International Conference on Architectural History held in 2019 at France. She also has to her credit an article titled Digital Architecture and Placemaking in Today's Concept in the December 2018 edition of our Buildings and Construction magazine. She is also a Carnatic singer and an avid blogger. Welcome you, ma'am, to today's evening session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. First and foremost, I thank Jaya School of Architecture for giving me this opportunity. First thing people ask me is, how does architectural history actually interest you? Or how do you get the interest to research on history? It started off with my reading habit when I picked up several books on Tamil literature. I'm sure you've heard of it, popular novels of Kalki, Parthiban Kanavu and Ponniyin Selvan, and a few books of Sandilyan, where it's Kadalpura and all of that. So all these are books based on history, where it talks about the Indian connect of how the kings from the Indian subcontinent traveled across, and what are the various what did they achieve by traveling across, what kind of trades happened between the various countries. So that was something that had brought about this whole idea of wanting to research on this particular topic. Right. So in today's presentation, this is what I'll be talking about. Basically, to give you an idea, it's going to be about what are the different countries in Southeast Asia. We'll talk a little about the kingdoms in India, the kingdoms in Southeast Asia, and we'll need to understand the Indianization of Southeast Asia at large. And finally, I'll be talking about the architectural connect in terms of planning, in terms of various elements that we see. I'm not going to be getting too technical about it. I'm just going to be giving you an overall gist about all of this. Right. So very often we use the term Southeast Asia, but not, I mean, most of us are not very sure about which countries do we talk about when we're saying Southeast Asia. There are 11 countries the minute we say Southeast Asian countries, okay? And the boundaries are basically, we talk about south of China. So here you can see, I'm hoping my cursor is visible. So here you can see this is China. So south of China, we talk about southeast, the country of India. We also talk about the boundary of northwest of Australia. So technically, we talk about countries of Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Korea, Malaysia. There's a small country here which is called Brunei. We also include Philippines, again, Indonesia, and there's another smaller one here. It's called Timor. So all of these 11 different countries is what we consider and what we call as Southeast Asian countries by large. Okay, when we talk about Southeast Asian countries, we need to remember the fact that in ancient times there was this one component which they called as Father India, which was basically the Indian subcontinent and the whole of Southeast Asian countries combined together. So this map that you see here, it's an 1860s map, where you can actually see the whole of, you can see India, you can see all of the Southeast Asian countries coming together. So this is basically what was considered to be further India. The reason this is important in the context of today's topic is because during the early centuries, when I'm talking, the period I'm going to be talking about in particular, there wasn't something called, you did not have something called Cambodia, you did not have something called India. It was just a group of different places that came together in a region. So this is basically to give you an idea to understand all of that. And the sea route here, the Bay of Bengal here, and the Gulf of the Bay of Thailand, the China Sea, all of this played an important role in the trade, which went on to establish this aspect of Indianization in Southeast Asia. So having understood what Southeast Asia is, what are the different countries, and having understood what further India is, we're going to look at what the different kingdoms in India are. So if you go back into history, right from the 12th century before the Christian era, right up to 1947, we've had 57 different dynasties that have ruled over our country. But of that, we're going to be majorly concerned about these set of dynasties, primarily because they are the ones that have contributed by large for the architectural influence in Southeast Asia. So the first one is the Mauryan dynasty, right? And the Mauryan dynasty is basically, you can see the extent Mauryan dynasty in the map that I've shown here. Okay, it had one of the largest empires in India. It was between the 3rd to the 1st century before the Christian era by itself. And then we've got the Gupta dynasty, which is again found majorly in the northwestern and the northern parts of India. This was between the 4th to the 6th century of the Christian era. And then we had the Chola dynasty, which is again a major contributor towards this Indianization. So the Mauryan dynasty and Chola dynasty, I will be explaining a little more in depth as we progress further. So the Chola dynasty is again was something that you have between the 3rd century before the Christian era, or 3rd BCE as we call it, right up to the 13th century. And then we have the Pallava dynasty that ruled over a smaller part of southern India between the 2nd century to the 9th century. You have the Rashtrakutas covering Karnataka, what is today Karnataka, or the Deccan and central parts of India. Again, this was between the 7th to the 9th century. You have the Chalukyas. Again, the Chalukyas are considered to be successors of Rashtrakutas. They were between the 9th to the 12th century. And then you have the Hoysala kingdom, or the Hoysala dynasty, which is again a smaller kingdom between the Pallavas and the Chalukyas. You will find them ruling between the 10th and the 14th century. And finally, the Pala dynasty, which covered parts of Uttar Pradesh, present-day Bengal and Bihar. This was between the 7th to the 11th century. Now, the reason I'm talking about only these in particular is, as we progress further into the day's presentation, you will see a few examples of architectural landmarks that these dynasties have left, and how much of similarities you will find in these masterpieces in the Indian subcontinent with a few in the countries of Southeast Asia. So this is about the kingdoms in India. So then let's look at the kingdoms in Southeast Asia, right? So this is again a very old map, much older than the 1860 map that I showed you. So we're going to be looking at to understand the different kingdoms in Southeast Asia. Again, here We're going to be looking at exclusively these 5 dynasties. Again, purely because they've contributed much towards the architectural marvels that are present in these countries today. So the first one is the Funan dynasty. You can see that it covers major parts of Cambodia, Laos, a little bit of Vietnam, and all of that. Now, there is one theory that goes that says one of the Pallava prince by name Kaundanya, he is said to have set sail from the eastern coast, and what has happened is he's moved all the way right up to Cambodia, and I will be showing you some route maps through which it is said that this particular prince had traveled, and he is said to be the founder of the Funan dynasty, a Pallava prince who left the Indian subcontinent. He had a marriage alliance with the Naga dynasty princess there in Cambodia, and that's how they say the Funan dynasty was came into existence. So again, the Funan dynasty was something between the 1st and the 6th century. The second dynasty we're looking at is the Chenla dynasty. Now, this is a dynasty that came forth from the country of present-day China. It has a lot of Chinese influence, and again, they kind of conquered major parts of Vietnam and Laos. The third one we'll be interested in is the Srivijaya. So here you can see very clearly from the map that it's major parts of Indonesia. And this Srivijaya dynasty, they were basically followers of Buddhism. The Mahayana Buddhism religion was what they predominantly followed. And they were in existence between the 7th and the 12th century. And a lot of connect between the Chola dynasty in India and the Srivijaya dynasty in Indonesia is something that you will be seeing further. Again, next is the Shailendra dynasty, right? This was between the 8th century. This is a typical Hindu. This was a typical Hindu dynasty that ruled over parts of Indonesia and the islands around. This was between the this was around the 8th century. And finally, we have the Khmer dynasty, where I'm sure a lot of us here have heard about it. It's the very well-known dynasty which gave us this the Angkor Wat, right? We call it the it's all known as the Angkorian dynasty in short. And the Khmer dynasty is basically said to be a combination or the success of the Funan and the Chenla dynasties together. So even when you see the map here, you can see how they've actually, the empire is like a combination of the Chenla and the Funan dynasties put together. So we've now understood the kingdoms of India and the kingdoms of Southeast Asia. So let's look at the Indianization or the connect. How did this actually happen? Now what we mean, this term Indianization is a term that was coined by a French archaeologist, Georges Codes. And he says it's basically to understand the impact, not just in terms of architecture, but in terms of culture, in terms of religion, of how the country of India impacted the countries in Southeast Asia. Right. So amongst various theories, the 3 theories that are dominantly spoken about, and that are believed about is the theory of the traders, theory of warriors, and of scholars. Now, before I go further, there's this small thing we need to remember. The kingdoms in India, they were dependent on the Silk Route, which was connecting Central Asia right up to East Asia for bringing in goods for trade, for bringing in gold from Central Asia. But right around the beginning of the Christian era, the 1st century, there was a lot of political chaos that was happening. There was a lot of movement of people that was happening in Central Asia. As a result of this, the Silk Route was not considered to be safe for goods and trade happen through that. As a result of this, what happened was the kingdoms in the Indian subcontinent, they looked towards various other directions apart from the Silk Route to get hold that is required for their empire. As a result of this, the traders were asked to go overseas, travel through the sea and figure out ways and different goods in different countries and things that they can bring back to their empire. So as a result of that, that's where you start out with the theory of the traders. So before I talk about this Chola dynasty's route here, one thing you need to remember is when trade actually started in the initial days, it used to happen along this border, right, along the land. So people, the tradesmen would actually travel along the coast, very close to the coast rather, on the sea. And right about here in near Thailand, we have this place called the Isthmus of Kra, it's called. So that isthmus was the point where the traders' ships were docked, and then they would move over to the Thailand Sea there, and then further progress into Cambodia. But what started happening over a period of time was they found it extremely tiring to go right along the coast and all the way up to this, again dock a ship and then move on across land and go on to the other sea. Instead, what started happening during the Chola period was, this was the trade route that was taken. This is through the Java Strait right here, which was cutting across the Srivijaya Empire in between the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia here. And yeah, just a minute. Yeah, so it was happening right over here. And one thing that you go back into history, what we find is one of the Chola kings by name Rajendra Chola. He was the son of King Rajaraja Chola. He has a title. It's called they titled him Kadaram Kondan. Now Kadaram is actually this island here in Indonesia. So how did a king who was majorly ruling across the southern part of India get a title called Kadaram Kondan? Is because of this particular Java Strait. So there were wars that had waged between the Chola Empire and the Srivijaya kings because they had levied, the Srivijaya kings had levied heavy taxes on for the vessels that were traveling through the Java Strait, and for which to revolt against that, the kings from the Chola dynasty have traveled all the way to this island of Kadaram, fought wars over there to do away without these taxes, because this Java Strait is most important for the uh, trade routes happening right up to China. And another thing is, what you could see is through the Java Strait, what would happen is you had the Mekong basin here, the Mekong Delta. So now Mekong, if you see, this is the Mekong River. Now this river is basically used even is used for trade even today, to trade between these countries internally. Now this river is something that starts in the Tibetan plateau and goes all the way into the sea here. It travels through China, Burma, Laos, parts of Cambodia, and finally out through into the sea through Vietnam. So what would happen is the ships passing through the Java Strait would actually move on to through the Mekong River into the inner parts of Cambodia, right? And the Mekong Delta served the purpose of solve the issue of people having to move inland. And as a result of this, what would happen is the ships would travel from India in summer, and by the time they reach Cambodia is when the monsoons would set in. So they would actually, halt there for the next couple of months. So because of this movement happening, because there was trade that was happening, there were warriors who were sent along with these tradesmen to protect them against pirates. There were scholars who were sent by the kings of the Mauryan dynasty to spread Buddhism. So it was a combination of all of this. The tradesmen, the scholars, and the warriors, all of them have been the most significant reasons of how Indianization has happened in all of these countries. So I think that gives us a fair idea about what were the different theories, how we've actually the Indian culture and the religions that were based in India have traveled all across into Southeast Asia. Having said that, let's look at the architectural connect. Now, this is basically the parts of an Indian temple, right? All of us are very familiar with this. Most of us here are architects, so we know what the different parts of the temple are, right? The Vamana, the Pradakshinapada. I don't think I need to elaborate on each of these components or each of these elements, but all of these elements are significantly seen in most of the religious buildings that you find in these different countries. So you will find, I will be looking at one or two of these elements. I'm not going in depth about all of this, but here let's just take a quick look. You have the mandabas, you have the, this is the Vimana, which is basically the has two components, the Garbhagriha and the Shikara by itself. And then you had the Pradakshina Pada, which is basically the ambulatory path for circumambulation. You had the Ardha Mandapa, which is the entrance porch by itself, and all of this. So these are the various components that you will still see in the other architectural marvels across the continent. Okay, so a quick look at this. I'm not going to tell you what each of these are. Okay, these are architectural plans of two very different religious buildings. I think I'll put it that way. So, and it will be nice if somebody can guess what these buildings are. Anybody. You can see things that are very similar in terms of architectural feature between these two plans that I've shown here. Can anybody guess what we're looking at? Anybody who's would like to take a guess? I wouldn't mind even if it's going to be dropped in the chat box.
The Tanjore Brihadishwar temple, perhaps?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Oh.
The one on the right is the Brihadishwara temple, right? So that's the temple that was constructed in the 11th century in Thanjavur in India. The one on the left is Angkor Wat in the 12th century. This is in Cambodia. So you can actually see the fact that the cardinal directions have played a very significant role. You can see that there's an ambulatory path around the, there's an ambulatory path that's present, okay, for circumambulation. So two entirely different monuments from two different countries, you can see some similarities in terms of its planning. Again, the next one I'm showing you is, right, so this is Angkor Wat. Now the one on the right, this is Borobudur. Now Borobudur is basically, what can I say, it is a Buddhist monument that you find in Indonesia. This was built in the 9th century. Again, though it's a Buddhist monument, you can see that there's a circumambulatory path. You can see that it is got the axis along its cardinal directions, which is again something that you can see in Angkor Wat as well. Right. Again, any guesses on what each of these are? All of these are in different countries, right? So the first one here, this is the Lakshman temple, which is found in Khajuraho in India. This was in the 10th century. This is Parambanan, which is in the 8th century. This is something that was built by the Sanjaya dynasty. This is again found in central Java in Indonesia. Is Angkor Wat. This is in 12th century by the Khmer dynasty. Now, one thing you can see in common amongst all of these, the three different monuments here, is all three are mounted on what we call the pita or the pita, which is it's a decorated platform, right? A series of steps that leads up, right? This is you can see it in Angkor Wat, you can see it in Parambanan, you can also see it in the temple that's here in India. So you can see it being raised in a higher platform, right? So the mounting of a particular structure on a higher platform, and you will always find these series of steps in the cardinal directions. And these are just a few examples I'm showing you. There are a lot more that you can actually, as the research progresses, there were a lot more of these temples and religious monuments that had very similar planning concepts as well. Now the next, right, again. So again, one of this is in India. The other is in Indonesia. They don't look exactly alike, but you can see some similarities in terms of its architectural elements. So one is the Shore Temple in Mahabalipuram, which was constructed in the 6th century. It's a structured monument. And the other is the Dieng Plateau, which is again found in Indonesia, right? So this was constructed by the Kalinga dynasty. It's found in central Java. This is the Arjuna temple. Now, one thing that's very interesting about this Diang plateau is the fact that surrounding this Arjuna temple, most of it is not cannot be seen today. But according to documents that's available, you had temples that were dedicated to the Pancha Pandavas, very similar to what you found, what you can find in the in Mahabalipuram in India today. They did have the temples dedicated to the Pancha Pandavas in the Yang Plateau by itself. So again, how is that happening? It's purely because there was a connect between the religion being common between the two countries. Okay, now this is very interesting. This is so far we've seen two different Hindu monuments. Now this is a Buddhist monument. Okay, one of this is in Indonesia, the other two are in India, but you can see the similarities, right? So what you find here, this Kesaria, okay, this is found in, this is a 3rd century monument, a Buddhist stupa that was constructed by the Mauryan king Ashoka in Bihar. And though it is not as ornamental as the one seen in Indonesia, the one in Borobudur, Borobudur in Indonesia rather, the Kesaria has very similar concepts seen. So you can see what's here in Borobudur. Kesaria also seems to have something that was very similar in terms of its elements. Again, Laurya Nandgar belongs to the 4th century, and this was also by the Mauryan dynasty. This is also in Bihar. The other one we're looking at is Borobudur, which is in central Java in Indonesia. This was by the Shailendra dynasty in Indonesia. So you can see that there are similarities. They are not the same, but you can definitely find similarities. Now, one aspect about these monuments in India, the Kesaria and Laurya Nandgar, is the fact that due to invasions and political unrest, there have been, they have been destroyed. And this is all that remains of each of these stupas in today's context. Whereas the one in Indonesia, you can see that it is, you understand the fact that it's a UNESCO heritage site, which is why you can still see the ornamentations intact. Okay, now this is one of the architectural elements. This is called the Makara. The Makara is basically a Hindu mythological creature. It's a legendary sea creature by itself. And it's called a Makara based on Sanskrit, meaning a sea animal as such. So I can tell you one thing. One of these images is in India. The rest of it is, one is in Cambodia, one is in Thailand, and the other Indonesia. But you can see how similar each of them are. You can see the Makara right here. They are the guardians of doorways and gateways. They are the it's a characteristic motif that we find in our temples. So this here is something you find in Belur in India. This is the 12th century temple. This was constructed by the Hoysalas, right? Now the one here is in Cambodia. This was constructed in the late 20th century, Angkor Thom, which is again by the Khmer dynasty. Now the one here is in Thailand, and this in Indonesia. This was again by the Shailendra dynasty. So you can see that there are similarities, meaning you can clearly see the fact that it is a Makara, but there are some aspects of it that seem to be slightly different when comparing it to what is here in India. Similarly, we see this is called the cube, or we can also literally translate it to the glorious face, right? It's considered to be again a mythological character, which is supposed to be a fierce swallowing monster which has just a face and 2 hands. And here again, if you see, it's in different countries, right? So the first one here, this is This is found in the Kasi Vishweshwara temple in Lakund in India. This was constructed in the 8th century by the Chalukya dynasty. Whereas you can see this, something very similar. You can see the Kirti Mukha very evident in this. You can see the face, right? This is in Borobudur. This surprisingly is a Buddhist monument. This is in Indonesia. The one here, the Siam Reap, again, this is by the Khmer dynasty in Cambodia in the 9th century. And this is the Wat Ban Ping in Thailand. This is much later in the 15th century. So what you can see is they're able to find the fact that there are elements that have been not literally replicated, but in a lot of sense, you can see similarities with some amount of changes to its original character. So going forward, right, as an understanding, what we can take forward from this is the fact that when you look at the Indian influence on the Southeast Asian countries, you can summarize it broadly into 3 periods, right? So the first period is right up to the end of the 8th century, where you can, the 8th century meaning, for you can see it in the timeline here, the Funan dynasty or the Srivijaya dynasty's works. You can see for a fact that the complete influence of Indian art and architecture is there in all of these monuments. And you have a second classical period where between the 8th and the 12th and the 1200 AD, where you find that there is a combination of the local art being infused into what was taken from India into these countries. And finally, there's a phase where you no longer see the exact aspects of the Indian architecture in it, but the impact that the Indian architecture has left on these monuments or the architectural styles of these different countries is something you cannot miss. So it's very interesting. I mean, it's a very broad topic. If I go on talking about it, it takes a lot. But I just wanted to give a brief idea about how India has influenced or has impacted, and the culture and art and architecture from the Indian subcontinent has traveled all the way to these Southeast Asian countries. And what can we see in these Southeast Asian countries today is what I wanted to talk about. So thanks a lot for the opportunity. I hope I didn't overshoot my time.
No issues at all. It was a wonderful.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, SRIRANJANI, ma'am. It was a very awesome historical, evidence that you showcased today. I think it was an awesome presentation. And you were the first lady presenter in our DECODE series, and we thank you for that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to invite our Dean, ma'am, to give the vote of thanks and a few words to SRIRANJANI Srinivasan.
Thank you very much, ma'am. History is also a topic of my interest too. So I am following this, and my research is also on anthropology and culture. Maybe I could add one more information for you. There is a researcher, international researcher called Indawa. Okay, and she also did it, but she took it on vernacular architecture between India and thing, and it was very amazing to see not only temples, even the huts were similar. It was fascinating to watch her present. She presented in India from I think she was from Thailand or China. I'm not very sure. I did watch her presentation too, and it was very similar to what you were doing. Wonderful insight and awesome presentation. I love the simple way that you had put it across that anybody could understand. I'm very sure many people ran away from history, and you made it easy for all of them. It's lovely to. They say it is very important to know your roots. It makes you more complete, and this is part of that. And architecture. What is architecture? It's assimilating everything, all our past, and it helps us focus and gives us a better identity and understand it better. Thank you so very much, ma'am. Thank you for giving us your time and sharing all your research with us. It was wonderful listening to you. I thank the audience who joined today. In spite of all your busy schedules, you have still made time for these sessions. So let's make this more interesting. tomorrow we will have another topic on sustainability and facades and how facades respond, how you can help better your designs with sustainability, taking facades as an element. So thank you for today. We will close, and I thank our mentors, our Dr. P. Satish Kumar, who has helped us through these sessions, all these sessions, for being the win-win at these programs. Thank you. Thank you, Esther, for being with us today and helping us in this team. I thank Jaya and the team behind this program for being there each day. Thank you. Thank you, one and all. Meet you again tomorrow at 6:30.